G'day, Laura. Welcome to Landscape Photography World.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. I know you class yourself as a wildlife photographer, and this is a landscape photography podcast. So you might be wondering why you're here, and some of my listeners might be wondering, but I hope to clarify that a little bit because my view of landscape photography is fairly broad, and it does include where wildlife might be in a landscape. And I know that can be a feature of your work. It's not always. I mean, obviously, do a broad range of wildlife, but do also include the wildlife in the landscape. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the whys of how you got into that and what is it about the landscapes, particularly African landscapes, that have really sort of drawn you in, and why they're such a big part of your life and why photography is such a big part of your life.
Yeah, of course. And you are right. Obviously, I shoot a lot of wildlife. So there's a lot of portrait work that goes in there and sort of action. But there's something really special about including the landscape in a photograph of African wildlife, or really wildlife anyway, that just gives you a sense of place of where it is. Africa is obviously a massive continent. It's got so many different types of environments. And yes, you can photograph a leopard in many of them, but the leopard looks very, very different if you place it in the landscape. And it really gives you sort of a sense of place to ground you where you are. And I can look at other people's wildlife photography, and if they've included landscape, I can almost 100% guess exactly where they were, just based off little features that you see. And I think that's really important in photography. Firstly, because it gives you something different. I mean, otherwise you're going to get bored photographing just a leopard over and over again as a portrait. And it just sort of, it makes it's so much more interesting for a viewer to view the depth of the landscape, to get like an understanding of where the sense of place of this leopard, how it's drawn into its environment, how it uses its environment, what pros and cons there are to that environment. And I think it's something for me that I really enjoy including in my photography after you've taken sort of your standard. I showed up at a sighting and it was an amazing photo. Yeah. There's so much more depth to look for and see how you can incorporate it into it.
Yeah. So why photography? Where did that come from? What was the germ of the idea that said photography is for me?
So I grew up in South Africa, so we sort of exposed very much to wildlife all around us. And I didn't, to be honest, I wasn't very interested in it for the first 18 years of my life. Okay. I sort of enjoyed the odd trip to the bush with my family. And, I never took the photos myself. I just enjoyed being there. But I wasn't enraptured by it like I am now. And that all changed at university when I started dating my now husband. And we started going away quite often. I guess I studied for quite a long time. I ended up doing my master's in tax law, which is very unrelated. However, it was because it gave me so much opportunity to travel sort of in the months of off season from uni.
Some might say there are some wolves in tax law.
Yes, there are. Fortunately, I've left
or
that
sharks, one of them.
Or sharks, yes. I've left that world quite far behind, but it just sort of, I started spending time in nature and I just fell in love with it, and it just snowballed incredibly quickly into, how can you share that love of nature? And photography is obviously such a great way to share your passion and share the love of the wildlife that you see. And I've been a very big believer in the fact that you can't encourage people to fall in love with and conserve nature if they aren't seeing it. And it's very easy nowadays living in a city. You might not really notice the stars above you. You might not notice a mountain or a bird flying past, or the 4 a.m. bird calls might be annoying because they wake you up. And so there's a sort of disconnect between people and nature. Yeah. And for me, I think sharing images and capturing those images, while it doesn't change nature or save nature on its own, it does give people a perspective where they look at it and they think, wow, this world is really beautiful. Whereas what is my place in the world? How can I change the world? How can I, care for nature? How can I sort of have more connection with nature? Yeah. And so as I got into it more, that became more prominent in my life. And here we are now. That's pretty much all I do.
I'm keen to explore a little bit more about the moment. Or actually, before I do that, I'm going to change the question that I was going to ask and ask a slightly different one. Where do you see your photography in terms of the spectrum from documentary through to artistic expression? And I know they blend somewhere in the middle, but I'm interested in where photographers see themselves on that spectrum.
That's quite difficult. So I actually would say I see myself in the past, I've been quite documentary based, but as I have spent more time in nature, I've tried to shift away to more capturing emotions. And I think that's a lot where landscape comes into your photography, when you're not just focused on sort of the close up of an animal that you're taking the photo of, but you're focused on the connection between it and the environment. And I think, exploring different techniques like ICM, like slow shutter speed, stuff like that, it sort of takes you a little bit away from the documentary side, but you're still documenting something about that animal. You're just showing it in a different way that's a bit more artistic. So I don't know, I guess it really depends where I am and what I'm shooting. When I go to a new destination, of course, I'm going to try and make sure I've got sort of the standard images that you would hope to have from that destination. Yep. But I spend a lot of time in countries like Kenya, Botswana. Last year, I was a couple of months in Zambia, and after a while, you've got enough of your standard photos and you start to look for different ways of capturing sightings, different ways of exploring the environment, even if I spent 5 days just watching Carmen bee eaters, like virtually nothing else. Just trying to see, the different way the light catches their wings, that kind of thing, and focusing on that as my subject, like the light as my subject, or the environment as my subject, and the animal is in it, but it's only to sort of illustrate the point. And I think that's where I would sort of veer towards the artistic side, which is something I try and teach. So I run group trips, and that's sort of something I try and encourage people to see, is the different ways of taking an image away from a sighting, because you can be 3 people in a vehicle and you can all leave with something incredibly different just based on lens choice and, shutter speed choice, and whether you're trying to be artistic or if you've seen this before and you might want to sort of push yourself a bit further. So I guess that's where I fall. Both ends.
I'm going to come back to the question that I didn't ask before, which is, where did the art start? Where did you sort of recognize, this is artistic, or I can make this artistic, and I'm now intentionally shifting my viewpoint a little bit? I understand that, if you're getting those standard documentary shots, here in Australia, you want to get an emu or a kangaroo or whatever, and, you want to get that classic shot if they're moving, looking towards the camera, that sort of thing, and you get your close-ups and your portraits, which are more documentary, but even still, they can still be artistic. And
of course.
I'm interested in where that sort of thinking started to enter your photography.
So during COVID, I guess it was the second year, COVID's a bit of a blur for everyone, but during the second or third lockdown that we had here, I managed to get myself out to Kenya just before it happened, expecting there to be another lockdown. And I spent about 3 months there at the time until Kenya had to close up. And having 3 months in one destination gives you a lot of time to play around. And I think that's when I started to explore it a lot more. I put a lot more thought into different ways to capture the same landscape, different ways to capture the same animals, because I don't need 3 months of sort of standard portraits. And some sightings lend themselves to a beautiful portrait, but some sightings lend themselves to just picking up a wide angle lens. Or for me, it's a lot of parking further away. So I might not always use a wide angle like you might use in landscape. I might use my 600, but I might, drive a few hundred meters away just to get the compression that you get, obviously, with a longer lens for your subject, while allowing the landscape to still be part of it. And because it was very quiet during COVID, it gave me a lot of freedom to explore how I wanted to shoot. There were very rarely anyone else in a sighting with us. I followed a cheetah mum and her 3 cubs from the day they came out of the den, almost always alone. So I could really sort of experiment with how I wanted to take photos, where I wanted to park, changing with the light without ever, getting in the way of another vehicle or anything. And I think that's probably when I started to explore it a lot more and put a lot more thought into the different types of images I wanted to take, because it was such a unique opportunity to have so much time to take an image like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Must have been a very interesting, a very different experience to a lot of people, where, I was in suburban Sydney when lockdown happened here for 165 days. So I started a podcast. It's now 4 and a bit years on, still going. But I guess for many people, that experience was in their homes. They weren't able to get out
Yes.
and so forth. So it does sound like you had a very different experience with
I did. So
the
it's a
lockdown period.
difficult thing to say that you enjoyed the COVID period, because of course you don't enjoy the COVID period. You didn't enjoy this horrible disease that was being infecting so many people and having such a massive effect on the world. But for me, I have got a South African passport and I've got a British passport. I'm very fortunate
Sure.
with that. And so I was able to sort of play through some of the regulations and, okay, right now I can be in South Africa, this is no problem, but I can't fly back to the UK from South Africa, so I'll fly to Kenya where you can fly back to the UK. So I'll
Interesting.
spend a month in Kenya and then I'll fly back to the UK, and oh no, Kenya's closing its borders, let me go spend some time in Botswana. So I was fortunate in that I was able to use it. And I'd gone full time on my photography about, I don't know, well, I worked part time just before COVID started in my old job, which I had left to go full time into photography, but I was just helping out a couple of days a week. And so with COVID, I didn't have an office job that I needed to keep going. And so I was able to sort of take advantage of it as much as possible. Of course, there were months when we were stuck at home, and I've got dogs as well. So, I spend, obviously, I have to be at home with my dogs. But I've got a very great house sitter, so no one needs to worry about my dogs. They've known him since since they were tiny, and he's really great. And I think my dogs consider him to be another parent for them. But it did mean that I had the opportunity to travel and to sort of take advantage of how quiet travel was and how quiet the world was, so that you could get enough time in nature in a way that, I mean, I probably will never experience something like that again. And it was devastating for local communities, especially in African countries that rely so heavily on tourism. It was very devastating to have a situation where countries were banning, their populations from visiting places like Kenya, where actually COVID didn't have a very big impact. They live a very outdoor lifestyle, very young population, very healthy population
Yeah.
in terms of, walking pretty much everywhere. You can watch the Maasai and they head out early in the morning and they'll be out with their cows the whole day, not eating, barely drinking, come back home, have a big meal, like very healthy, very unlikely to be infected by COVID.
Yeah.
And you were seeing regulations that were banning tourism from so many different countries. And in a place like Kenya, the knock-on effect in the tourist industry, each person working in tourism might be supporting 10 or 20 people back at home. So to lose such a large number of jobs is devastating. So part of when I was traveling, part of it was I didn't want to leave, because when you leave, you watch the camps close. And even if the camps are open just for a small number of people, I think there ended up being 5 or 6 of us who sort of moved around in one of the companies there, Kacheche. And we spent a lot of time there all together, sort of just moving around. But it meant that those camps actually had some kind of income. They didn't lay off anyone at all during COVID. Everybody kept their job.
Wow.
Sure, people probably weren't being paid what they would be used to being paid.
Sure.
But the effect that actually has on the wider community is massive. And there were some camps that did lay off lots of people. And I was lucky that I got to enjoy it. I also was glad that I got to be a part of companies being able to continue to employ local people when tourism is such a massive part in their life. And it was very, very difficult for the industry, obviously, to have people banned from visiting.
Absolutely.
So, it was lucky for me.
It doesn't look like that has started to come back, or is it back
Really
to where it
has.
was?
I would say tourism is probably higher than before COVID. I don't actually know, but visually, I would think that it is. Areas have really recovered, but it's going to always have a lingering effect, because now emotionally people are sort of waiting for it to happen again.
Sure.
And companies don't necessarily have sort of enough funds to support themselves if it happens again. And that's obviously a huge risk. That's a huge risk. And it's sort of just a risk we have to live with in the world. But it doesn't, I mean, it's a concern for people, but tourism has bounced back. And I think a lot more people are possibly enjoying traveling because they realize that it can be taken away from them at any moment. And so you are seeing camps, especially peak season, being completely booked out. low season is starting to become more popular. People are realizing, you can travel any time of the year and it actually makes completely different and very beautiful images.
Yeah.
When you have the rain coming in, it's not necessarily a negative. It
No.
can actually be a positive, just in terms of the kind of image you can get.
And a lot depends on where you are as well.
Yeah, very much so. So, I mean, East Africa, there are certain times of year you might want to avoid unless you like feeling like you may drown every time you head out on game drive. But it just, the bush comes alive in summer. It comes alive when there's rain. All of the new baby animals are born, and it's just completely different. You're photographing almost a completely different place. So I think, people are traveling a lot. People are starting to explore different seasons. And I think that's obviously really good for the industry.
Yeah. I want to move on to who or what has been the greatest influence on you. Is it a person, a place, a moment in nature?
The reason I really got into photography was I had an amazing wild dog sighting. So wild dogs are one of our most endangered carnivores in Africa. And it's mostly because of persecution. They need huge swathes of land. They're not territorial, but they have home ranges, which are massive.
Sure.
And they are very efficient hunters. So a lot of people maybe don't like them because of the way they kill their prey. But actually, I would say wild dog kills are a lot cleaner than the kills you will see a cheetah or a lion make, where they may start eating before the animal's dead. With a wild dog, yes, its adrenaline's pumping, but it's not feeling a thing from about a second into being caught, just because of the way that they hunt. And I had an amazing wild dog sighting in Kruger Park, which is a very accessible park in South Africa. Obviously, you can self-drive. And I've spent a lot of time self-driving there, and it's cool. But I didn't have a proper camera. And I have these really incredibly average photos. I just was, wow, I'd really like to actually take proper photos. And so it was right after that trip I bought myself a proper camera, and then, upgraded the lens. And that was a long time ago, and I have got very into it. But also growing up in South Africa, I was fortunate when I entered photography. We had a very good community of photographers in South Africa. Very helpful people like a Greg Du Toit, who's won Wildlife Photographer of the Year. It's like Pretorius, people like that. And they would actually put time into people entering the industry, not for any reason, but they would send you a message and say, oh, you haven't edited this very well. Could I give you a hand? Can you send me the raw file and I'll show you what I would do? And so having influencers like that actually went out of their way to help you get into the industry was amazing, because it felt like such a community. You felt like you were part of something. And obviously we're fortunate because we have access to a lot of wildlife, but it was the way people came together with that wildlife. I mean, even now I'll be driving in places, driving through the Mara, and I'll see someone I've never met in person, but I remember from the old days in South Africa of forums and stuff where we all used to talk, and they'll wave and you'll wave and you'll have a nice chat. And it's just it makes you want to be part of it. And that's something I would love to bring to more people now, especially as more women get into photography.
Absolutely.
I just think it's really important to feel like you're part of a community, and that there's actually people you can talk to who sort of have your back and want to help you, not for any other reason. Happy to share places that you go, happy to talk about different sightings, happy to give you advice, sort of in a friendship way. And I think it's quite important, because it gets people into it and it sort of hooks people, and that's what you need.
Definitely. I think social media is very much a double-edged sword, but it is, I think it's changed in the way that communities within social media have developed. But I think it's been both a way of people reaching out and finding one another, but it's also can be for some quite an isolating experience. What's your experience recently been?
On social media?
Yeah.
So I enjoy it. I enjoy being able to interact with different people, and I've met a lot of guests that I've taken away through social media, and there's a lot of people I keep in contact with on social media. And so I have found that part of it very positive. The negative part is that I think people only portray one side of their lives, which is fair enough if you're running it as a business, but it does sort of create a almost envy with others, and I can see how it can create a sense of isolation, especially with the way algorithms and everything work these days. And,
Absolutely.
People trying to get their work seen, or people who realistically their work's not much, but they've managed to amass a lot of followers somehow, sort of lording it over others. So I can see both sides of social media. Personally, I enjoy it. I enjoy it as long as you can find a way to limit yourself from being addicted to it and comparing yourself to other people. But I really enjoy it for the community. And I think I've been fortunate that I've got a good community on social media, and so many people I would never have encountered or met without it. And now who I might talk to every day or every couple of days. And it's a really great way to stay in touch. And it's a lovely way to share images. I do enjoy sharing them, whether they get seen or not, different story. But, you know, it's sort of an outlet for sharing something that you love so much. And it's sort of, I don't know, what do you think?
I think, yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I want to delve into, though, some of what you just talked about in terms of that sharing. So I think sharing photography in particular is akin to storytelling. And it is not necessarily, it's a visual medium, but it's still trying to communicate a feeling. And that sharing of images is a key part of why people do it in the first place. And I think where it becomes problematic is that people see other people having success, they feel they're not having the same level of success, and whether or not they are arguably a better or worse photographer, you know, a lot of that can be very subjective. I think a lot of people think quite negatively about some of their experiences on social media because they don't feel like they're getting their word out
People
there.
they do sort of
nobody's listening to their story.
No, I do see that.
And I think that is where the whole reason for sharing is you want to tell a story, and it might not be it might be that, hey, here's a pretty picture of a place that I've been. It might be, here's an expression of a feeling of a place, or a feeling, some of what you said around seeing animals in the context, and you get a different feeling when you see that versus a close up. And I think people want to express themselves and they want to put that story out there. But like anyone that's trying to have a conversation but nobody's listening, they're going to feel like they're rejected. And I think that's the double-edged side of it, is that if you can get a response to your images, and that's getting harder and harder, I think, the way the algorithms have changed, particularly on Instagram, towards moving images as opposed to still images, where it started. And you can argue till the cows come home whether that's a good or a bad thing, and it really depends on what sort of creator you are.
I think it's just a thing we have to live with.
Well, it's not something you or I can change as a user, unless you've got the money to go and buy it off Mr. Zuckerberg. I don't think he's selling it right now. So.
No, I don't think so.
And I know I can't afford it, but
yeah, no, maybe if we pooled our wealth.
Spoken about this on the podcast before. One of the things I'd actually like to see is a social media platform, and I am doing a little bit of work in the background to see whether or not I can make this actually happen somewhere. But it has no likes at all. There is nothing but comment. You cannot do anything other than comment on the image. So, you need to think about how that will actually work and how people will actually see the images, and whether or not there will or won't be an algorithm. I personally don't like algorithms. I like the fact that if I follow someone, I want to see the people that I'm following. I don't want to see suggested people, though that can be a good thing sometimes. But I also don't want to see loads of ads, which unfortunately is how they make their money. So where do you make the money if you're going to do it? So, but for me, the ideal platform would be one where it is actually about the story and the commenting. And by that, I don't just mean, hey, nice shot, Grant or Laura, which everybody gets, but it's kind of mean. And I really appreciate people that comment, and I will always comment back to them. But I also know that it feels a little bit hollow because there's not much to that conversation. It's I've seen something pretty. Yeah, thanks for sharing it. That's about all that interaction is. And I think having something that's a little bit more in depth is harder to do, but it's
a bit
also,
like a forum, to be honest.
Yeah, to be honest,
it's a bit like the forums I started on here.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. I come from the old bulletin board days and was a member of a number of forums and a few photography forums here in Australia. And going back to that, where you would actually have sections in that forum that are all about meaningful critique. Not only does that help the person who's posted an image, it also helps the critiquer in understanding how to do critique better.
Yeah.
And I think those sorts of conversations and forums are what's kind of gone missing a little bit in the rush to social media or the expansive growth of social media. That's my opinion.
I agree with you. And unfortunately, people have come to equate their wealth with their worth, equate their worth with their likes.
Absolutely.
And that's obviously not a very good metric, because you can have a lot of followers and be extremely average. You can have no followers and be exceptional. Yeah. And so for me, especially, and actually this comes into posting landscape images. Obviously, when I post portraits, they tend to do a lot better on Instagram. But that sort of would almost pigeonhole me into being a portrait photographer if I was photographing for Instagram, which I am not. Okay. So there's also sort of this illusion that everyone posts their best work on Instagram. And that I also don't think is necessarily true. I know that I don't. I keep a lot of images back because I just think they're too good for a place like that, right? But people
my portfolio edits are completely different to my Instagram.
The Instagram ones, right? Because you have to post for a certain type of image on Instagram. If you want it to be seen, you have to post the sort of thing that your profile is expected by the algorithm to post.
Well, I've stopped worrying about that. I just post whatever I do,
So me too, because I shoot more sort of wildlife in the environment images. I'm like, well, might not be showing my best ones, but I'm certainly going to be showing some of them. And yes, I will get about a quarter of the number of likes on it. But I've just sort of tried to start ignoring that. It used to bother me all the time that your likes were falling. And I just think, I'm very proud of some of the sort of animals in the environment shots I've taken. And I think these are so much more impactful. This is what I'd want hanging on my wall. This is what I'd like to take people away on trips to show them how to shoot, because it's just so much, it's so interesting. And because you can put so much depth into the photo. So I just have to ignore the likes. And it is difficult to do, though. It's much easier to do when you have a big account and you think, oh, I'll just ignore the likes, than when you have a small account and you think, well, does this make me worthless? Well, no, it doesn't at all make you worthless.
Yeah.
I see my husband, he's got not very many followers on Instagram, but he's an exceptional videographer. So, of course, moving pictures help him. But he doesn't have a lot of followers there, but he's really very, very talented. And so his worth just can't be tied to that. It's just, unfortunately, Instagram is not a good metric for your own quality in either direction. Just because you have a lot of followers doesn't mean you're bad. You could be great. You could be not playing any algorithmic game. I know I haven't, mostly because I wouldn't even know how to if I had to. Unfortunately, my IT skills don't reach
that
level.
I just forget to do video. The number of times when I go out and I come home and I go, oh, I could have done a video there. I just don't.
I've limited myself to trying to not do video too much, mostly because I find that as a stills photographer, especially with wildlife, if you try and switch between the two, you're definitely messing both up. The settings are completely different for shooting video to shooting an animal. You need to have a fairly high shutter speed just for your sort of standard photo. For video, you need to keep it to probably 100th of a second.
Yeah.
And those two settings don't go hand in hand. And as soon as you start videoing, I guarantee you something epic will happen that you really want a photo of. So all that will happen is you'll have the beginning of a good video followed by not a good photo. So I sort of try and limit myself to shooting.
I get that. I very much get that. Wildlife photography being a little bit different to landscape, at least for me. Yeah, okay, if I miss a wave, I know another wave will come through in a seascape. If I'm at a waterfall, I don't have to worry. It's all just it's just there. And my biggest worry is if somebody with a crowd of people walks through my shot, and then that's just a matter of my patience, which I have very little of. But
yes, I know we all do.
Wildlife, if you've got to be on it, and that thousandth of a second to 2,000ths of a second, can make all the difference between a good shot and an ordinary shot.
Yeah, and even so far as when you're in a sighting, if you are with, I'm going to use leopard again as an example, but there's a moment when they look up at something flying overhead, and that moment is so much better than all of the moments before that, just because of the ways their eyes change and the expression on their face changes. And that's something you might not pick out on your first time, but it's something that you do learn to look for. And if you're messing around with your settings, playing between things, you most certainly are not catching it. And it does actually make such a big difference. The thing with wildlife is you've got no control over the situation.
Absolutely.
And which is a little bit different to landscape photography. You don't have control over the light, etc., and people disturbing you, but you can pick a good day, pick a good location, go back there and have an expectation of trying to get your photo again. With wildlife, I mean, the number of times I've had a redo of a sighting, I don't know, I would say 0. I mean, some of the sightings I had back before I had a camera, I just will never get them again.
Yeah.
I know I will never get. I had a python catch an impala, and we got to watch the whole thing being ingested and everything. And of course, I've never seen that again. You know, in 20 years since that happened, and I didn't have a camera back then. And it's sort of wildlife. That moment is not coming back, and so you really need to choose how you use it and make sure that you make the most of it, because if you mess it up, you probably aren't getting it again. You know, you might get something similar, but you're not getting the right light, or the cat's not looking your way, or it's not climbing the right tree, or it's climbing the tree, but there's somebody parked behind it. It's not, you don't get a do-over.
Yeah.
And I think you really need to sit there prepared the whole time, sit through a lot of rainy days, a lot of boring light, waiting for the one time when the light comes together, the action comes together, the subject comes together, there's no blade of grass in the middle of your shot, that kind of thing. Because I'm not big into editing my wildlife. I don't believe in these over edits. I don't believe in this sort of like AI sky replacement. I'm sure you have strong feelings on that too as a landscape photographer.
And someone wants to do that, that's fine. I've done it myself in the past. I know how to do it. Do I do it? No, not very often. Have I done it in the past? Yes. But the number one thing for me that I do have a strong feeling about is if you're going to do it, if you're going to do a composite, if you're going to do blending, exposure blending or stacking, whatever it is, whatever technique you're using, be honest. Tell people this is what I did, you know. If you've included an AI component in there, that's okay. Artistically, if it works, it works. But
there's a lot more scope for editing, I think, in landscape as well. Like there is actually an expected scope of editing in landscapes, right?
To a certain degree, yeah. I mean, particularly in days gone by, it's got way better in terms of dynamic range, but exposure bracketing was pretty much the only way that you could shoot sunrises and have any kind of visibility of what's in the foreground, simply because, you know, once that glow starts in the sky, the dynamic range is so far apart between the shadow and the highlight that you had to bracket. Cameras today, you're closer together, but even still, there are some circumstances where bracketing is necessary, simply because. So
if I was to give you the biggest reason I never ever got into landscapes full time was because I'd have to learn how to do exposure bracketing and blending the two images together. Wow. And I sort of decided, I don't think that's for me, let's be honest.
So one of the reasons why I don't do a lot of wildlife, I'm very opportunistic. If I see something and I've got the right lens on and I can very quickly get my setup going, I've missed way more than I've taken.
Yeah.
I will shoot some wildlife, but I don't have the patience to sit there for an hour or two waiting for that animal to move. You know, I'm sitting there looking at that bird and he's looking away from the camera and not looking towards the camera, and it's kind of like, okay, is he going to turn around? Is he going to turn around?
Oh yeah, you should practice your patience on animals before you practice them on birds. But there is a lot of time spent waiting for wildlife to do something. A lot of time, and there's a lot of time and being disappointed. Yeah, it would have worked for landscapes. No, you'd be wrong though. I don't know that moment when you finally get a cheetah to do the thing that you keep asking it to do. So I talk a lot. I mean, when I'm guiding, I talk a lot because I'm speaking about settings and like sort of suggestions for how people might want to take the photo. But when I'm by myself, I talk a lot to the animal. They don't typically listen, but I sort of feel like I need to put I need to put my desires out there. So I'm like, would be really great if you climb that mound. No,
Or
but
manifesting.
not just yet. Could you just wait 30 minutes before, the light will be much better in 30 minutes? Or if they're on the mound, is there any chance you could just stay there till sunset? That would really, really help me out. So I do a lot of that, and that's how I keep myself occupied while I'm waiting. But I will say because I've had so much time, in the bush and on safari, the longest I've waited for something, I think, was 7 days, was actually 8 days, but there was a short break where I had to change camps in between. And that was for Lioness to move her small cubs. And they were sort of down in a little lugger, which is like a very small riverbed. And they were tiny and they could barely move out of the lugger, but we knew at some point that she would move them and there was absolutely no view. But I really wanted to get her carrying them. I've had it before, but I just really wanted it again. The thought of missing out on it was just too great. So that was sort of 8 days of my life spent waiting and hoping until eventually the rain came when I just moved to a different camp, made a quick call, moved back to the original camp so I could be in the right conservancy, because I knew as soon as water starts trickling in here, she's going to have to move them. And I did get it. So it was incredible. But I mean, that was an 8-day wait. That's a lot of patience. When you hear in calls about, a leopard's been found or a cheetah's been found, and you're like, okay, it's fine. I'm just going to sit here and wait because I just can't bear to give it up. So there's a lot of patience that goes into it. But when you get something really special, the feeling it stays with you forever. Like that, I can still remember all of my best sightings based on the actual sighting and based on the picture that I took. I can remember them like they happened yesterday.
Yeah.
I can remember all of the feelings. I remember who was with me. I remember if I'd been angry before or if I'd been happy before, or, exactly which bit of it I messed up. And it's almost like I've got a photographic memory for a feeling when it is attached to a photo that made me really happy or that I'd been waiting for a long time to get. And that's actually one of the things that gives me patience, because I just know, most of the time it won't work out, but when it does, wow, I'm going to have a great memory. That's going to be sort of so vivid in my mind. It's never going away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that is something that sticks with a lot of photographers. I'm very much the same about some of the shots I've taken. And it only takes a quick flip through either the portfolio or something to go, I remember that day. I remember what I was doing. And I remember exactly where I was standing, even if it's a close-up of a section of rock that's only 6 inches square,
Yeah.
I know exactly where that was, and that memory's stored away. And I think that's an important part in the communication side of things around how you are communicating what you're feeling. I'm interested in how you feel that you've been successful in that communication with the sharing that you've done with other people.
I'd have to think about that. So one of the things I focus on a lot when I'm taking photos is connection. So I very much enjoy the connection between subjects. So I love mums and cubs as an example. And it's not just because a cub is cute, and it's not because cubs are Instagram friendly. It's because I actually love watching the interaction between the two, or between two cubs playing with each other, or between two adults. Like you get two big male lions interacting with each other. There's something very human about a lot of wildlife behavior that you observe. And we get told not to anthropomorphize things, but I don't believe in not doing so, because I think that our version of love that we feel for a child cannot be too different from the instinct that a wild animal feels for its child. And we call it by a different name, and maybe we rationalize it more, but it doesn't mean that what a lioness feels for her cub is any different. What an elephant feels for its calf is any different. So I really love watching that interaction between two animals. And then you can take that further and look at the interaction between sort of predator and prey. And that's a whole different dynamic. It is life or death, but it's life or death for both. And it's much easier to be an impala born in the Serengeti than it is to be a cheetah. Your survival rate is much better. Yes, you see many impala being killed for food, but cheetah survival rate they struggle. Like you can't believe it. One in every
particularly the young.
make it. Yeah, right. So the cubs, their chance of becoming an adult is very slim, whereas the chance of an impala becoming an adult pretty high, even though there's a lot of predation. And so I think a lot of the emotion that I like to put into photography comes from the different types of interaction that you get. Um, it also comes a lot from things like the weather. So obviously, one of the things I do struggle with, I know for myself, is picking out an image that is very good and removing my emotion from it in order to do so.
Okay.
So I'm quite an emotional photographer, I think, and I choose a lot of my images based on how I felt taking the image, whether it was something I had dreamed about taking. So I do struggle when it comes to, say, competition decisions, like what to enter into a competition, because I struggle to remove my own emotion from the picture. But in some ways, I see that as a strength because it means I know I'm putting emotion into the photo as well, because I'm looking at the connection between subject and environment. I've got this image that you've got of a cheetah cub, and it's running up like an acacia tree that's at a slant in the sunset. So I remember that I was a sighting I had with two guests of mine, and all the other vehicles left because the weather wasn't very good, and the cheetah were in very long grass. And I was just looking at this tree, and I said, just so sure at some point these cubs are going up this tree. And so we sort of parked, we set up our cameras to do something that was wide, just because it had so much potential to be spectacular. And it's a photo that I absolutely love because this little one is just running up this open branch. Yes, there's a few trees that are a bit annoying, could probably edit them out, but not for competition. But I love the photo and I love the memory attached to it because everyone else had left. And it was, that time when sort of everything goes still and all the daytime animals go quiet and all the nighttime animals start. But there's this like lull just around sunset before you get to many of the night sounds. And it's so peaceful, and you're sitting there and you're waiting, and then the thing that you've hoped for happens, and it makes both a beautiful photo, but it's also an emotive photo for me, having taken it, for my guests who were there also taking the images, and I think for people looking at it, because it's this tiny, vulnerable cub, and this spectacular sky and this wide open environment. Why is it running up the tree? Well, a hyena arrived. The best way to get a view over the long grass to keep yourself safe is to go up a tree.
Yeah.
And as soon as, you can delve into so many different layers of the picture to put emotion, to find the emotion that's in it. And I think that's how I try to do it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about how you decided to go full-time. You said that you were working part-time for a period, but at some point you decided to start making money out of your photography. And I'm always interested in those stories of how people say, okay, I'm going to give up a steady wage and go and do something that's incredibly risky from a financial perspective because there's not a lot of money in it unless you can get yourself well known or work really hard in doing things like workshops and education, which is where most photographers earn most of their money.
Yeah.
How did that decision go for you?
So for a long time, I took only contract work. I actually worked at the same company, but on various contracts because I didn't want to go full time because I wanted to have 3 months a year at least to travel. So it was sort of like the agreement is every time the contract came up for renewal, I was off for at least a month. Then I would come back, and that was the agreement. And eventually I went full time. I asked for 3 months off when I got married. And they said, that's fine, but when you come back, you're going full time. Okay. So I went back full time and I stayed for a couple of years. And then I ended up moving to a different division away from accounting to do copywriting and brochure design, which is something I'd never done before. But obviously because of photography, I was competent enough, and I have a fairly good grasp of the English language when it comes to writing. And this is a financial company, so financial brochures, a lot better than a lot of the people in the team who were definitely more numbers people. So I ended up doing that. But our company had a choice to make between funding two different projects. And after maybe 18 months or 2 years with them, the one had really taken off as an energy provider. And so they decided to put the funds into that. So my choice was going back to accounting or leaving. And I decided, okay, I'm going to leave because I want to do more photography, and accounting's not really for me. It's very much in an office. No one really understands why I'm so crazy on weekends about driving hours to photograph a puffin or something. So I left, and I ended up going back just part-time to help out. But it just got to a point where I thought, I had a really great boss, and he said to me, if you are afraid of a decision, and so you're marking two options equal, but one is one that is scary, then actually that is a decision you have to take, because that is a decision that is much better for you. You're just marking it down because of the fear.
Yeah.
And I thought about that a lot, and I thought, you know what, you're right. And I can always go back to accounting. Accounting's something you can sort of pick it up. And I thought, you're right. And let me just go. And okay, the timing wasn't great that it was COVID financially, but it was great that I had the opportunity during COVID to spend so much time just working on my own photography. And yeah, so I went for it, and it's worked out well enough for me. And I love it. I love it. I like taking guests. So I enjoy running workshops. I don't do many, but I enjoy it. I like taking private trips, because then you've got guests that you can focus on exactly what it is that they're after from the trip. You can sort of tailor where they want to go. If you want to see cheetah, your best choice is probably the Serengeti, second best probably the Mara. But if you want to see leopard, well, the Serengeti wouldn't be my first choice. Maybe Zambia or Botswana.
Yeah.
Not that you can't get leopard in those places. It's just the kind of environment that you get it in. So being able to tailor trips and stuff, I love that. It lets me travel. I do some lodge work as well, and some lodge photography, and my husband does videography. And we've done quite a lot of work with cheetahs, where we've just followed two families to try and sort of tell the story of how they're struggling. It's called The Last Cheetahs. It's worth watching if you haven't seen it.
I'm going to say I have, but I'm definitely.
It's really good. It's about half an hour long. It's won a lot of awards, actually. It's awesome. A really, really, really nicely told story, and lots of amazing footage. And yeah, and I just decided, I'm going to stick with this and make it work. It brings me so much joy, and I am very happy. And I know that it's a privilege to be able to do. It's not necessarily an easy life. You're away from home a lot. You're sort of away from friends and family, and people look at it, and this is, where something like Instagram comes in. People look at it and they see, oh, wow, you're always traveling. Oh, wow, you're always taking these amazing photos.
Very glamorous, yeah.
Yeah, right. It seems very glamorous, but it's a lot of early mornings, a lot of late nights, a lot of flying, which I absolutely hate. A lot of missing out on things, a lot of not being around when you might like to be around. A lot of, you miss your dogs. My dog has cancer now. I need to stay at home for a while. That's another difficult choice to make. It's also a financial choice to make.
Sure,
it's just so it's not this amazing, easy life that it looks like on social media. But that doesn't mean I don't appreciate the fact that I have it and have had the opportunity to take it so very much. Like, I absolutely love it. I wouldn't change a thing. But it's not simple. And I think a lot of people who do guiding and who travel a lot like I do would tell you this same thing. People who've got kids, they're missing out on a lot of things with their kids and being there for their families. And it's a difficult choice. It's one I'm very glad I've had the opportunity to make. And not everyone can. And not everyone should, realistically. It's not just because you love photography doesn't mean you should do it full time. Sometimes doing something part-time lets you enjoy it a lot more, because there's no financial obligation. There's no sort of choices to be made. It's just doing something that you love when you have the time to do it. And if you make it into your job, you risk losing that love for it, which is sort of why I've tried to build myself a good balance of work and non-work, my own photography, to develop my own skills. But it's not something that's for everyone. Also, not everyone makes a good guide. There's a lot of people who probably might be a great photographer, but probably shouldn't be teaching. Probably don't know where they go well enough, or haven't been to enough places really to share that. And that's fine. It's not for everyone, but I'm glad that it is for me. And I do feel that it is for me, and I'm pleased that I took that step. And yeah, hopefully it continues to be as good as it is. And
you mentioned balance, which is something that I often ask people when we're talking about their sort of career as a professional photographer. And it's not just balancing family and the logistics and so forth around the trips away, etc. But I think it's also balancing the various hats you've got to wear. You've got to be the CEO, the chief marketing officer, the chief accountant, which you'll be fine with.
Yeah.
But, chief marketing officer, etc., etc. as well as an educator and a photographer, and have time for the family and your own photography and
Yeah.
your own creative outlets. How do you try to balance those things? Do you try to balance them, or do you
Well,
sometimes let things swing one way or another?
I hate I hate marketing. I very much hate selling myself. Honestly, I'm not even that good speaking on camera. It's not
You're
something
doing a
that
great job
comes.
now.
Thank you. It's not something that comes, that naturally to me. I enjoy people. I enjoy people, especially in small groups. I enjoy spending one-on-one time and actually getting to know somebody as
Mm.
opposed to sort of frivolous conversations. So yeah, marketing's not my big strength. Of course, accounting, I've more or less got that under control. I'm very good at organizing travel. It's probably the thing I'm best at, even better than photography. It's just I thrive on organizing things and sort of trying to make ducks line up in a row. That's my strong point. And yeah, I try and give myself enough time at home. I sort of have a rule that I typically won't ever be away for more than a month, without at least a corresponding 2 weeks at home,
Sure.
just because you do need time to yourself. And it's a tricky balance because travel is work and home time is rest.
Yep.
But for most people, of course, travel is the rest.
Is the
And so
rest.
when you
Yeah.
get back
And
from a
for
trip
many of
and
your
then,
clients, that's the case.
yes, right? And then I get back from a trip and I just want to just do nothing. And people are like, but why? You've just been away. And you're like, yeah, I'm exhausted, actually. I know it doesn't sound like I should be, but just trust me, I am.
Uh,
So, yeah, I mean, that is difficult. That it also means that you are less likely to be like, oh, cool, let's go for a drink tonight. Because you're like, nope, I'm already on my 8 o'clock bedtime from when I was in the bush. So yeah, I try and balance it. I think it will only get more difficult to do. Um, and but that's kind of a choice that you make. I can either have this life, which is the life I've dreamt about having and that I love so much, or I can have an easier life with easier decisions about what to do with my time. And I've picked this one. I've done both, and I'm happy with my choice. But I don't love confrontation. I don't like asking people to give me money because I feel a sense of responsibility for what I'm providing them. And I know I'm providing them something good. And that's a confidence. It's sort of like you need to have that confidence to do so. But it is something that you have to develop. It's something that you have to build up in yourself to
yeah.
know what you're offering is good, to sort of stand by what you do. And I do. But it's not something that just sort of came naturally to me. It's something I've kind of taught myself to be better with.
Mm.
Same as to be in large groups of people and talking about things. I'm, you know, made myself get good at that. To be honest, being in a corporate world actually probably helped with that because you have no choice.
Yeah, well,
Um,
this is
so,
you do learn a lot in a corporate career
yeah,
around how to manage some of those things and manage the imbalances that may be there and the
exactly.
decision making that you've got to go
Yeah.
through. I'm always interested in the most important thing that you feel you've learnt that you didn't know when you started.
About photography or in
No,
life?
about running your own business.
About running your own business. Hmm. Well, I don't know. I would have to say it's marketing, to be honest. That's
Okay.
probably, and I think it's something I'm still learning.
Mm.
Um, Sort of putting yourself out there as a marketer and pushing a product, but trying to find a balance between sort of like an educational balance between, well, I'd love to chat to you about stuff, but also this is something that I do as a job. I think it's sort of something that's a bit tricky to learn.
Yeah, sure.
And it's definitely something I've had to work on. Um, yeah. I don't know. The rest of it, I think, comes much more naturally to me than
Okay.
marketing. So I wouldn't say anything else yet. Probably there's still things I'm learning. I probably just haven't noticed that I'm not good at them yet. I'll get back to you.
I think you also touched on something that's really interesting, and that's pricing
Yeah.
and putting a value on what you're providing and working out. Okay, well, on top of the base cost of accommodation and transport and logistics and food and entertainment and whatever else happens, you've then got to actually make some money out of all of this because they're all outgoings for
Yeah.
a business. So how do you go about that? Do you fall back on some of your accounting skills to say, okay, well, it's a cost plus and, I've wet fingered that this will be the number per hour or per day or whatever for me? Or do you do it in a different way. I'm always interested in how people
Yeah.
actually price themselves as well as their work.
So I think a lot of it for travel time is mostly I'd work on a sort of day rate for myself. Obviously there's also travel and things like that you have to factor into. But I think that the most important thing from my side is making sure that the value I'm adding is worth the cost that I'm charging.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of people need to really think about whether or not this is the career for them and whether or not guiding is the thing for them. I have got 20 years of experience just doing loads of different wildlife travel, but I also have a lot of experience of many different places. So when I'm taking guests to a place, it's because I've been there, it's because I've tested the product, it's because I know. Last year I spent a lot of time in Zambia because I've got a trip this year with guests for about a month. I'll have a trip next year and the following year to Zambia. So I spent a lot of time because I want to make sure that I'm actually adding something real to their trip. They don't need me sitting in the car for no reason. So yes, I have a lot of faith in my photography skills and my ability to teach that. But it's more than just that. So I know areas, I know where I would want to take you for sunrise. I would, I know if the leopards aren't performing, what are we going to spend our time on that we're still going to come away with amazing photos? And to do that, you need to know an area. You can't just sort of show up and hope for the best.
Yep.
So I have a lot of local guides who I've worked with before, so they know what I'm after. They've worked with me in a way that I know they know how to position the vehicle, that they know exactly what my instructions are, because there's a very big difference where you're parked, what kind of image you come away with.
Sure.
Sometimes you need to change exactly to the opposite of where you were parked. And so I try to work on where I'm creating value to make sure that any trip that I'm taking guests on is actually worth worth having me along for them. And additionally to that, I also try to not put on trips that I think, even though it's not down to my cost in any way, it's down to the camp's cost where I do not think it's worthwhile. So if I get a quote back for a group trip and I think, I just don't think that that's not worth your spend. I'd rather that you spent less money and you got an experience that was superior. So I'm not trying to take you to the most expensive camps. I'm not trying to earn the biggest commission off, popping you in Botswana's most expensive lodge. I want you to go to a place where I know the wildlife is going to be solid, where I know the experience is great. Yes, the lodge maybe isn't as fancy, or there's a reason that you have to choose it, but it's something that I'm making an active decision on to try and ensure that you're getting value for money, because you might only have an 8-day period to come and travel. That 8 days should be spent in a place that actually is going to deliver for you, not where you're just throwing money at something that's sort of not pointless, but would have been better than elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I try and work my pricing around that. I try and, just to create value in the thing that I'm offering in a way that I would personally want to spend my money on it. And that's always how I view trips. Would I spend this amount of money on this trip as a guest? Yes, I would. Would I go to that destination myself because I believe in it on my own money? Yes, I would, and I have. And that's why I'm taking you there. I'm taking you there because I've been there, paid for it myself, loved it, and know that you will like it for X, Y, Z reasons. If you come to me and you say, I'm really desperate to see bee eaters, I'm not going to take you somewhere where you might see a bee eater. I'm going to say, okay, you're going to have to suck up the heat, and it's going to be a good 40 degrees during the day at least. But you are going to get amazing bee eater images. And this is the camp you need to stay at, because I know the boating guide is amazing at keeping you steady on the river in the right spot for the bee eaters, And that's where I add my value. And that's also what I think guests deserve when they are giving you money for something. I think that they deserve a product that you actually believe in and have tested yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. It sounds to me like you're really good at your marketing.
No, I wish I was. I'm very good at my product.
Well, that was a great ad.
What my product is. Thanks. Maybe you can just send me a soundbite and I'll use it.
Oh, definitely.
But I believe in my products, and so I'm good at that side of it. It's just putting yourself out there feels so, I don't know. It's just not something I love doing. You should travel with me, and these are the reasons why. Because also I don't want to knock other people. That's not what it is. But I'm putting my product out there because I believe in my product. And that is something that I just find difficult to do.
Yeah.
It's easier when you can have a conversation about it. If someone calls me and wants to talk about it, I will tell you why my trip is great. And those will be reasons I truly believe in. Just putting it out there facelessly to the universe, it's not so easy.
I'm quite happy for you to use any of this video and sound bites. If you could retire at one of the places you've shot, which one
Yes.
would it be?
Oh, it's a really difficult decision. Honestly, it's really difficult. So I've considered a lot about moving to Kenya. I really love the Kenyan people. I've got a lot of Kenyan friends who are really great. And the Mara is such a prolific place for wildlife but it can get busy. So it's very tricky. Botswana is the kind of country where you would have no problems living there. It may be a more simple life you'd have. But if I could live in the Delta, big problem, I can't have a dog, right? So that sort of is the reason I wouldn't say definitely Botswana, and it's just because I like to have a dog with me. Kenya, you probably could have your dog with you. Serengeti, you couldn't. Obviously, that's Tanzania.
Sure.
Zambia, the light in Zambia is, for you doing landscapes, the light in Zambia is, it's unreal, just based on where it is, sort of like, obviously, East Africa's on the equator. So sunrises and sunsets are very fast. Like you cannot imagine the difference in speed at which the sun comes out on the equator versus in somewhere like Zambia.
Yeah.
And it's just on the tropics, where you get these wintry sunrises and sunsets where that sun is just red and all the dust is sort of diffusing the atmosphere and it lingers forever. And you've actually got time to be like, let me put this elephant in front of the sun. Okay, it's moved. Let me do it again. Let me do it again. And the sun remains amazing and beautiful. I've had a leopard in Botswana just on this fallen dead tree and the sun slowly setting behind, and it was really smoky because of just wild bushfires. And it was amazing because you could just sort of like move around and just get so many images. In East Africa, you're like, okay, here comes the sun. Click, click, click. Sun is too high in the sky. That is over. Time to go shoot from the other side. But then in East Africa, you get these epic skies. You get these like landscape skies, right?
Yeah.
Where you have storms that are like, I've got images of giraffes, tiny little giraffe in the frame, and these storm cells that are, you almost can't comprehend how big they are compared to a giraffe. And we all know giraffes are huge, tall. And so, I don't know. Just retire in Africa. Just drive around. Just
Drive around.
have a car and drive sort of East Africa down to Southern Africa and back again on a rotational basis through the seasons.
Well, it's a purely hypothetical question anyway, because I'm retired now and I'm moving.
You're looking for something?
Well, no, I am moving somewhere else.
Okay.
It's in Australia, but
it's
not going to stop me travelling around though.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, yeah.
Somewhere in Africa.
You talked about a number of memorable experiences that you've had.
Yeah.
What about horror stories, things where you've gone, I shouldn't be here?
Well,
and I know safety is a big thing in doing safaris because, it's like keep your arms and legs inside the car at all times.
So one of the things they say, right, they say that animals don't see you in the vehicle, that they just see the shape of the vehicle, which therefore they don't think about it. Okay. So that is not true. Well, they can say what they want, but I'm telling you, I've had cats lock eyes with me in the vehicle. You squeak something. Certain lionesses some lionesses have crazy eyes and you just know they're not for people. Other lionesses couldn't. I'm not saying that you're in any danger of being attacked in the vehicle. I'm saying when your guide tells you they don't see anything but the shape of the car, that is not true. As for scary experiences, I'm risk averse. I'm risk averse with guests and I'm risk averse on my own because I don't think when you put yourself in danger in nature, you're putting more than yourself in danger, you're putting wildlife at risk. Sure. So if you go and do something stupid, there is a chance that animal will pay the price for your stupidity. Even if you don't think it's stupid what you were doing, sort of like feeding a baboon, but that baboon becomes habituated and all of a sudden that baboon has to be taken out because it's tried to take food from people. And, baboons have canines like lions. So it's risky. So the animal I'm most nervous around is an elephant.
Okay.
So because I grew up in South Africa and South Africa, Botswana, Zambia have all historically had some issues with elephants. And so I think that you don't push them. Somewhere like Amboseli, I feel very comfortable with elephants because they are incredibly relaxed. The guides know each individual family very well. The guide I work with in Amboseli, guy called Chege. He's fantastic. And he sees them coming from far and he can tell me exactly the temperament of the family I'm working with. But in South Africa, Botswana, less so. So, but I do not avoid elephants, but I do give them the appropriate amount of space. And the scariest elephant experience I've probably had was in Kruger Park. And Kruger Parks are different. The problem with Kruger is you get a lot of people self-driving. And not everyone self-driving is necessarily self-aware. And so they are definitely will push wildlife like an elephant more than they should. So if you are on a path and your camp that you're going to as a self-drive person is at the end of that road and you could take a detour that takes an hour and a half, I would take the detour. But some people who are inexperienced with wildlife will see an elephant on the road eating at a marula tree and think, well, I'll just go up closer and closer and he'll move off the road.
Yeah,
now, that
I'll
might
get
be
him to
true.
move. Yeah.
Right? Sometimes that's true. And sometimes he will move. But sometimes an elephant's in must, which is when they are ready to breed. And so they're looking for breeding females. And they really love marula fruits. Sometimes that elephant's not moving. So my scariest experience was in Kruger self-drive. And I was on a gravel road early in the morning in an area that's from a camp that's got very few people staying in it. But there was an elephant bull and he'd obviously had enough bad experiences over the preceding couple of days that he was mad and he was far off the road. We saw him, but he was far off the road. And I was in like a little tiny manual, not a city Golf, but I don't know what the equivalent would be in Australia, but the equivalent of not a very good car, sort of like a 1.2 manual, no grip on the gravel roads kind of car.
We have Golfs here, but yeah.
Okay. So that's a common South African car for sort of students. And this elephant was far off the road and we were just driving around. We didn't even stop to look at him. And we just carried on driving past and all of a sudden noticed in the rearview mirror, this elephant has taken exception to our existence and was coming at full speed with his head down from far and driving and trying to change gears on this gravel road in this car that has no power trying to get away from. That was very scary. And that was a situation we didn't put ourselves in. We didn't, we had absolutely nothing to do with this elephant. We hadn't even encountered him. Honestly, if he was 500 meters from the road, he probably was about that. It was far.
Yeah.
And yet we were going for our lives away from him. That would probably be one of the worst experiences I've had. I've had other experiences that are scary, perhaps, whilst living them, but are amazing experiences afterwards. So I've had one night in the Kalahari, which is another place you can self-drive. And I was staying in a tent, but like it's sort of on a raised platform. So it's a permanent structure tent. And the little kitchen is maybe 3 or 4 meters away, also on a raised platform. Busy making, cooking some pasta or something, like whatever's cheap in the kitchen. And all of a sudden there's just a commotion at the waterhole down in front. And you sort of like, looks like some lions and hyenas. And next thing, from behind the little tiny kitchen, just lions streaming past.
Wow.
And it was obviously 2 different prides because there was a good 6 or 7 male lions in there that had been attracted by the sounds at the waterhole. And now we're going to have this confrontation. So we just switched off the stove, left everything, ran back, shut the door. But it's one of those, it's a national park. So it's one of those doors that sort of unclips itself sometimes. Sitting there and there's just male lions, females fighting all around. It felt like we were like the epicenter of their disagreement all around the tent. So we're busy packing everything we can find in the room, like our bags and furniture, all against this door to make sure it doesn't pop open. Not because a lion wants anything to do with you. They don't. Like they're not interested in hunting you. They don't see you as prey species. But they are, running away from another lion for their lives. What if they bump into the door? And I don't think our bags were going to stop it happening, but that went on for what felt like the whole night of us just sort of sitting there staring out of these little gauze windows with torches every now and then, trying to make sure, please don't come too close. It was scary, but it's mostly the thrill afterwards that you feel because you've just, you've been part of something that's incredible. The sound of a lion roaring and the sound of a lion fighting, it goes like through your body. So you can imagine the adrenaline that you were feeling is quite high. Absolutely. But it's not necessarily you in a dangerous situation. But just afterwards, that was epic. I've had it with polar bears. It's probably the most dangerous.
Okay.
So a polar bear is an apex predator. with no predators of its own. It's only man, really, that will ever kill a polar bear. So all of our cats are used to growing up, lion, leopard, whatever. They could be taken out by a hyena. They could be taken out by another cat.
Sure.
So they typically view other things that could be predators, which includes humans with our front-facing eyes. They view us as a potential threat, and so they don't hunt you, okay? The polar bear, on the other hand, has got absolutely no threats. It is the king of its realm. So if a polar bear sees your boat in the ice, a polar bear will often come over to check if it's a dead whale. Looks like a whale on the horizon. And so when you encounter a polar bear on land, if it's an area where they're not used to encountering people, like Churchill, I know they do walk with them with guns. But when you encounter a polar bear somewhere like Svalbard on land, you do need to get off land. And so I would say the first trip I did up there, twice we were chased off land by polar bears.
Wow.
Once the polar bear was a dot in the binoculars. And a friend and I were having a look. We're like, I'm sure that's a bear. And we're like, no, the guides leading the trip would have spotted it. I'm sure it's not. Anyway, eventually we thought, hey, just tell someone. And this polar bear was running from far away on this little spit of land to come. Everyone raced back, got on the Zodiacs, pulled off, left all of our stuff on shore. And this polar bear went through all of our stuff sniffing just to see if there was any food there. That is actually a scary situation.
Yeah.
At the time, of course, it was fun. But when you look back at it and you think, well, that could have ended badly if we hadn't spotted the bear,
Definitely.
It's an apex predator. A lion, if it charges you, you can shout at it, make yourself bigger, bang stuff. The chances of you actually being injured are very, very small.
Yeah.
Something like a polar bear, not so much. An elephant as well, if they take exception to you. So that's why I'm cautious. I just don't really, I don't want to put an elephant in harm's way. I don't want to put myself in harm's way. I'm not going to take risks. If an elephant looks angry, you find another way to go around. Just simple maths, survival maths.
Well, I think that answers kind of my next question, which was,
okay,
how has photography shaped your relationship with the natural world?
Well, for sure, it's opened my eyes to nature. I grew up in Cape Town, and obviously, have you been to Cape Town?
I have not. I haven't been to Africa at all, I think. No.
Okay.
No.
I feel like that needs to change.
Probably.
Yeah. So we've obviously got Table Mountain in the center of Cape Town, right?
I've seen video and photos. And
Yeah.
I've seen the rugby and the cricket there and that sort of thing.
Yes, of course. Yeah, watch South Africa win. We're very good.
In the rugby recently, yes.
Yes, the cricket, not so much.
Yeah.
But you've got Table Mountain, there's a couple of rivers that run through Cape Town, like Leesburg Parkway, and you get flamingos on it occasionally. And so it's the sort of thing you don't pay that much attention to until you start taking photos. And then all of a sudden you're looking at the mountain and you're thinking, wow, look at the way that the light is falling on that path of the mountain. Or wow, it's rained a lot. Look at the waterfalls and how beautiful those are. Look at that flock of flamingos flying. Wow, if they only flew a little bit to the side, perhaps you'd have the sunset behind them. And even though it's just in your day-to-day, maybe your commute to work, you're looking at nature completely differently. And I think that for me is the biggest thing that has come from photography and my relationship with the natural world is, aside from the fact that I love it, that it's the only place really where my mind switches off. When you're taking photos, you're not thinking about anything else. You're thinking about the photo. You're thinking about the moment. You're not worried about, I don't know, paying your mortgage or nothing else is on your mind except for how to take this photo. And that's a wonderful feeling of clarity. But the way that you notice things around you, I wonder if that swallow is nesting there. Oh, look at the little mouths, hiding under. You notice things differently. Because of nature, you notice the light. I mean, honestly, I notice the light all of the time. And I love that. I love that I can be driving and just thinking about how beautiful the light falling is. Because imagine if I had XYZ subject to put in light like that. And I think, I've noticed it in my dad, for example, because of my photography. And obviously he's traveled a fair bit with me. But when I send him photos and then he'll phone me and he'll say, I just saw the most beautiful shaft of light. And I'm like, how wonderful is it that he is thinking like that during his day instead of, okay, it's just the sky.
Yeah.
Like landscape clouds, you know what a landscape cloud is. I see clouds and I'm like, man, if I was just a landscape photographer, those are some clouds. I think your average person doesn't really look at clouds with such interest.
No, I get rather excited about clouds some days.
Yeah, I imagine that you do.
them and I go, that's very exciting.
No, exactly. But when you get a good set of clouds, I
Oh,
mean, it
yeah,
just brightens your day for no reason at all. So,
definitely.
yeah.
I'm keen to understand how people think in terms of inspiration and when that in their own photography. Obviously, if you're doing a workshop, you've got to be up for it. But in your own photography, do you ever find times when you're not inspired or you're struggling to find inspiration and you're trying to work out, okay, do I still have it in me? Do I still want to do this?
So I do go through spots in my own photography where I'm sort of like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Get your shit together. Sorry, get yourself together.
That's
And
okay.
like I can swear, all right. And for sure, I do have moments like that where I am lacking inspiration. But then what I normally try and do is I find myself a different style of photography to try and spend some time working on. So it could be something as simple as going and trying to shoot a seascape. Okay. Now I know I don't do pure landscape photography a lot, but I do enjoy ICM. So sort of
Yeah.
like movement with the waves and stuff. And I might sit down and just think, okay, how can I shoot this in a way that even though I don't need this picture, I don't need a landscape photo. If I was to put landscapes up in my house, they'd be animalscapes or they'd be someone else's landscape that I bought as a print. So how can I take advantage of this and teach myself a skill for my future wildlife photography? And that's where I try and reignite my inspiration is I'll take a skill that I might not, or a subject that I might not necessarily care too much about, and I'll just work it to try and put myself into the mindset of using a different skill when it gets to my wildlife.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden you're looking at wildlife differently and you're thinking, yeah, actually that thing I practiced, that would work really well here. And that would work really well here on the river. That would work really well here with the clouds or whatever it is. And you can kind of encourage yourself to grow. Like I say to a lot of people when they ask me about wildlife, I really struggle with getting my focus to be perfect. And I'm like, okay, but do you live on Earth where there's birds? Yes. Okay. So sit in your garden, and I don't care if it's a dove. If you sit there and you practice focusing on the dove, even if the first 10,000 photos are bad, at some point it's going to click how to do your focus on that dove. And it doesn't matter if it was the most boring subject. You've sort of taught your brain to shoot that subject.
Yep.
And so it's great. It's a great way for people to practice when they feel like there's nothing around. Like, sure, there's no big cats, but that doesn't mean there's nothing around for you to take photos of. There's something that you can do it.
It
And
could
I
be a
bring that
house
into
cat.
my own.
Not
Right?
big.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so, okay, why don't you go and practice slow panning? Practice slow panning on your dog. Practice slow panning on your cat. And I try and take that into my own photography. So I will sit down and be like, I'm going to teach myself how to better capture the movement in the water. Because at some point I've got an elephant walking through the water, and then I'm going to know exactly how I did it before.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of continuous learning is a really good way to reignite your excitement for subjects that have become familiar over time. And if you arrive at a sighting and you've got 5 different ways of shooting it sort of in your arsenal, you can leave with 5 different photos from one sighting. You don't need to find 5 sightings to have something interesting. You can have 5 completely different and interesting photos, your wide angle, your long lens, some slow panning. And I think that's a really good way to keep yourself fresh and inspired. And obviously looking at other people's images, not to replicate them, but to sort of work out how they did it or think about maybe what their thought process is, or, wow, that's a really interesting story. Sit down and actually look at it and think, okay, so what story did they want to tell here? How have they told it? Is there any way I can use that storytelling in my own photography? And I think that's where the community comes in. It's so useful to have people to speak to and bounce ideas off, but also just to look at their work. And just because someone is in a completely different field doesn't mean that their work can't have some kind of relevance to your own work. That's what I do.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic advice. And
Yeah.
it also comes back to the reason why you're on this show.
Yeah.
What you're doing does have some relevance to what
Yeah.
landscape photographers can do. And I think your experience and some of what you've just talked about there is fantastic advice for any photographer of any genre.
Yeah. I think the thing is they all have such a crossover. We all are, at the end of the day, shooting nature in a different way. And there's no reason why a lot of those skills aren't translatable. Yes, I'm not going to do bracketing and merge my photos, but that doesn't mean I'm not looking at how the sun might land on something and how I can capture that naturally. It's all of it, they all go together and they all enhance our appreciation of the natural world, even if they're not our own genre. So why not?
Definitely. Fantastic. Speaking of advice, what's the best piece of advice and or worst piece of advice anyone's given you?
So you might have to edit this bit out while I think.
That's fine.
Best piece of advice.
I'm used to people thinking in this time.
Really don't know.
I think one of the best ones I've heard you mention was when your boss basically said,
that is my favorite vid, but I already used that. Can I use it again?
I know. Yeah, you can review it. I don't care.
Okay, I'll use it again. The best piece of advice I've been given is probably my old boss who told me, when you are afraid of something and the two things seem like equal choices, to take the one that you're afraid of because you've marked it down in your head. And I think it's something that you can apply to a lot of different aspects of your life. And it also just changes the way you think about things. My same boss actually said to me, if you imagine the cost of something, would you sell the object yourself for that cost? So let's say you wanted to put money into a trip. If someone offered you that much money for the trip, would you give it to them? Or would you be like, no, those memories and that trip is so precious to me. I don't want to give that away for any amount of money. Is also a really good way to decide if it's something that you're willing to spend money on.
Yeah.
So I think those are two bits of fairly decent advice. Probably the worst advice I could think of might be something like to take a tripod in the car with you, only because when you are not shooting sort of freehand, like using something like a beanbag or whatever when you're shooting wildlife is great, but using something like a tripod to shoot wildlife is really not a very good idea at all. Or even a monopod, you do see some very strong supporters of the monopod, but you do not have the flexibility for wildlife or birds that are on the go when you're sitting in the vehicle with your kit on a monopod. You are definitely going to miss shots. Same as for, and it's not for, there's a big place for them for many different genres of photography, but not for wildlife. Completely different if you were sitting in a hide or static in the field. Yes, by all means. When I went to shoot owls last year in Minnesota, I obviously had a monopod with me because I can't be carrying my lens around all day long to shoot an owl.
600 mil weighs a bit usually.
Yeah, so it's fairly heavy. Other best bit of advice is get a good physio on call. I use mine for a lot of, it hurt my shoulder again. Please, could you help me out?
I think some advice for the camera manufacturers is make lighter, big lenses,
Yeah, it would be nice. Lighter and cheaper. Can we have everything?
Well, yeah, way cheaper.
Isn't that the saying with the tripod? You can either have sturdy, cheap, or light, something like that. You can pick two. You can't pick the
of course, then it's going to be rubbish quality. So, the images aren't going to be as good as the really heavy, good glass that you get.
Yeah. It's a badge of honor to be able to carry your glass when you're shooting.
Oh, definitely.
But definitely cool.
I see a lot of guys at sporting events with the big bazookas out, and it is you see the Sony guys and then the Canon guys and the Nikon guys, and it does seem to be a bit of a mine's bigger than yours contest.
Yeah, it is. You should try being a female photographer. Ooh, are you wearing that big lens by yourself? Yes, no, I am. In fact, thank you for noticing. But yeah, they're all tools at the end of the day, right? One of my favorite lenses at the moment, I've just got the 135. I think it's a 1.8 by Canon. And I'm loving shooting with it because it's allowing me to do so much more environmental stuff, and because it's really, really fast. And it's probably not your typical piece of kit to necessarily have for wildlife. I think it's sold as a portrait lens, but I absolutely love it. It's great. Yeah. Also because having a fixed focal length that's quite short forces you to spend a lot more time thinking about your composition, like a landscape photographer would, right? Yeah. You have to sort of think about what you're including, where you're going to park, because you're not going to be taking a close-up picture with it. That's just not what it's there for. And so it forces you to take note of every straggly branch that's coming into the frame and exactly which ones add to it, which ones don't. Or, sometimes moving 20 centimeters forward can completely change your photo and give you a beautiful, clean background, or put another subject behind. I've got this great picture of a leopard in the forest in Zambia with this huge elephant behind it. And it's something that you might not necessarily think of doing. But when you're shooting with prime lens, you notice the things behind because you can't recompose too much.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, maybe if I just drive a little bit forward, wow, look, actually, that's really cool. That shows 2 of the key species of willow Zambezi in one photo. Or 3 species, if you include light, which I do, because the light there is so different to anywhere else. You've got this filtering light coming through the forest, and then you've got an elephant and a leopard. I mean, what more could you really want from a photo? It just tells you everything about where you are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do love shooting with sort of a quirky lens. It's actually where I challenge myself sometimes, is I'll just say, okay, today you're going to only shoot with this lens. So off you go. Find a way to make it work. Oh, you saw a cool bird? Well, how did you shoot it at 135 mils? Why not? Like, why not push yourself like that? Maybe not if it's your only trip to Africa for the year, but if you've got time to do it, it's a great way to make yourself think about what you're shooting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's good advice in whatever photography genre you think. Maybe not portrait, probably a little bit different, but for artistic photography, particularly landscapes, give yourself a fixed focal length and stick to it. And even if all you've got is zoom lenses, you can still pick a focal length and stick to it and don't move from it. There's ways and means of giving yourself those restrictions which help you improve, I think, your
overall... Sort of force you to
think about it.
Carefully.
I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I got was from when I was at school, and our lecturer basically said, a photograph is as much about what you exclude as what you include. And that has always stuck with me, and it's one of the reasons why I try to challenge myself with different, crop sizes in terms of, using different focal lengths to say, okay, well, what is this going to contribute to that end image that I'm looking for?
Yeah, like a conscious decision to put something in or out. And I do think that is really important. I think it's what takes you from a person who takes photos to a photographer, is thinking about what you are going to exclude and include. And sometimes that's why it's also very valuable to get criticism from other people on your work.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Because you might not notice it because you remember the feeling and you remember the sighting, and you just don't notice something that's actually a glaring flaw that can easily be removed, but you need somebody else to look at it and go, well, that white spot in the corner is really bothering me. Oh, yes, actually, you're right. That is really bothering me too. Now that you've pointed it out, it's all I can see,
Yes.
And you can't always evaluate your own work quite as well as a trusted person can evaluate your work for you.
Totally. I did have one weird bit of feedback a few weeks ago from somebody saying it was a photo of a waterfall which happened to have probably would have been about a 7 or 8, maybe 9, 10 metre log leaning up against it. And they said that was distracting. And I said, well, I wasn't going to go and try and move it because I couldn't. And couldn't crop it out, so it was there, and
so it's there, and that's how it is.
That's how it is,
Yeah, I would say another bit of advice is not always to listen to the advice that you're offered.
Sometimes, yes.
Sometimes you have to. You can exclude the noise, whether it's from a person. If somebody is offering a lot of noise, and you're like, "Where is your backup for this? Could I see your portfolio for why you think that you
That's usually what
offering this advice?"
If it's online advice, then I go, "Okay, what's your photography like? Do I vibe with?"
Yes, not so much. Okay, then not so much. And also just generally speaking, even if some advice might be good, it might still not be what you're trying to do in your story. And I think that that's fair. I think that excluding what people say, no matter their experience level, no matter who they are, can actually be just fine. Same as you can learn from someone who's a beginner because you can see the world through their eyes. Like I love it sometimes with guests who don't know much about wildlife. And you can see something totally differently through their eyes because of their enthusiasm for something they've never seen before. And I think you can learn sort of from anyone if you're open to it. But in the same breath, you should also discard information from anyone if it's not in line with the vision that you're after. Just because they said it and just because they may have experience doesn't mean that they're right. There's no right or wrong answer in your own vision that you're shooting. So
Totally. We've got to wrap up, and I've only got another couple of questions for you anyway. Are there any photographers that I need to be talking to on the podcast?
So I don't know if you've ever spoken to Hooghat Malan. He's a South African photographer.
I have not.
He's exceptionally good. He is the other reason I don't do landscapes. because he is just so talented. And I just always, I look at his stuff and I think, if I'm ever going to put a picture on my wall of a landscape from Southern Africa, it's going to be yours, not mine. So let's be realistic there. I'm not competing with you. He's very, very good. Another photographer, Isaac Pretorius, he's the first person who ever got me into shooting birds. And he shoots some very good landscapes too. He's a really great guy.
Awesome.
Maybe the two of them would be very cool guests for you to have.
Fantastic. Thank you. My last question is one that I've been asking right from the beginning of the show. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
I'm allergic to pineapple.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think you're the first one with an allergy to it. I
actually met someone recently who had an allergy to it, so I didn't make it up. But yeah, unfortunately, can't eat pineapple, so definitely wouldn't put it on pizza anyway. But now I definitely can't.
Yeah, my wife, and I'm not sure exactly which ingredient in the pina coladas tends to
could be the pineapple.
Tends to have her lips puff up when she's had too many. So
sounds like pineapple, yeah.
Yeah, or too many pina coladas. One of the two.
It's too much alcohol. It's not a problem I have.
No, it's not me. I don't like pina colada. No. Anyway, thank you very much for spending some time with us. It's been wonderful getting to know you better, Laura, and thank you for your wisdom and stories. Where can people find your work?
So on Instagram at Laura Dyer Photography, and then lauradyerphotography.com is my website. And I also write on Substack. It's called Your Safari Guide or Your Photographic Safari Guide, but the link is Your Safari Guide. I'll send you the link to it. And I sort of just write about, I do a lot of destination information on there. Mm-hmm. And then I also do a little bit of behind the scenes and sort of what I think goes into good wildlife. And it's a nice way to share because you can put, as you were saying, about including a story, it's a kind of place where you can actually write about something properly and give so much more depth than on Instagram where it's sort of no one even really reads the caption. So it's a cool place for me to share. And great to see anyone there.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Laura.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at Gruntswinburne Photography. You can find my work in this podcast at gruntswinburnephotography.com, along with all of the social media that's out there, except Twitter. I don't do that anymore. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe because it really helps to get the podcast to be seen and heard. I'm Grant Swinburne and I hope to see you out shooting soon.